One of the lessons in leadership is you've got to be yourself. You've got to learn, when you're young, you're sort of reading about leaders and get excited when you're sort of like the leader you might see out there or read about. But in reality, eventually you realize, you know what, nobody does you better than you.
Hello, fellow leaders, and welcome to the Military Leader Podcast, where you can find conversations with today's most successful leaders. I am Andrew Stedman, and I want to thank you for taking the moment to check out this episode. You can find this episode and lots of other leader development content at themilitaryleader.com. And if you haven't visited the website yet, I invite you to head on over there after this interview and check it out. You'll find blog posts that I've written and that my colleagues have written on leadership, and then you can connect on Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn and join the conversation about leadership that is happening every day in the military leader community. Now, if you're like me, you've noticed that too often leader development takes a backseat to other activities. We don't talk about leadership enough. We don't coach it enough. We just end up getting too busy. And then we wonder why followers haven't grown into the leaders we expect them to be. Well, with this podcast, I hope to make it easier for you to become a better leader and then grow your team to become better leaders as well. I've connected with leaders of many professions, not just the military, who are making an impact and are excited to share their lessons and insight with you. And I'm fired up that the very first guest on the Military Leader Podcast is General Robert Brown. General Brown has spent the last 37 years leading soldiers from platoon to corps level and is the current commander of U.S. Army Pacific Command, which, as he'll explain in the interview, is the Army's largest component command. But what I love about General Brown is that he is passionate about developing leaders. Anyone who has ever worked for him can tell you that. When he talks, you hear words like trust, empowerment, and character, and those words really mean something to him. And he's got a coach-like ability to keep people motivated and to lead them through the toughest situations. And that really comes out in this interview. You'll hear him, among other things, you'll hear him talk about what he calls the toughest day of his career in Mosul in 2004 in the Chow Hall bombing there. It was a tragic event. He'll also talk about authentic leadership and how the Army should be doing better at tough, realistic training to prepare soldiers for the rigors of future combat. It's a great chat, tons of lessons in here. I know you'll enjoy it. Here's my conversation with General Robert Brown. General Brown, welcome to the Military Leader Podcast, and thank you for taking the time today. Sir, I'm really excited about this interview, and I know the audience will be excited about it, particularly because you're passionate about the topic of leadership and never hesitate to invest in developing leaders whenever you can. I'd like to give the listeners a little bit of perspective about your current duty and your command there. Would you take a moment to describe U.S. Army Pacific's mission and its impact on the Pacific Theater?
Yeah, absolutely. And Drew, let me just thank you for doing this. This is a type initiative we need more of, the military leader. And you've had the website for a while now doing the podcast. I really applaud it. We don't talk enough about leadership. We talk about a lot, but not enough still. And we certainly don't spend enough time developing leaders. So a tremendous job. So let me, on the U.S. Army Pacific, first of all, I'm really fortunate to command the Army's largest Army Service Component Command, about 106,000 across the Pacific, which is 52% of the Earth's surface. We say from Hollywood to Bollywood, polar bears to penguins. And the interesting thing about the Pacific is there's a lot of blue. And so some people say, well, it's a Navy theater, it's an Air Force, but it's a joint theater. And by the way, people live on the land. So, there's a lot of blue, but they live on the land. And it's interesting. I was fascinated. Mega cities is a big trend. They're growing all over the world. We know combat we've seen recently in cities, unbelievable, like we haven't seen since World War II. But there's 36 mega cities in the world. 24 of those 36 are in the Pacific, which is very surprising to people.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah,
yes,
24
sir.
of the 36 and growing more than anywhere else. 7 of the 10 largest armies in the world are in the Pacific. Another surprising fact to people, 7 of the 10 largest. And it's a complex theater, 36 countries, 16 time zones. When you look near-term threat is obviously North Korea, where we're at greater tensions than I've ever seen in my 37 years before. And then longer-term challenges, China, and certainly Russia's in the Pacific as well. And then we do have violent extremist organizations. So that's just a little bit. And for U.S. Army Pacific, sometimes confusing for folks. We're the component command for Pacific Command. So I'm the Army component to the combatant commander, Admiral Harris, and of course there's a Air Force, Navy, Marine Special Ops component, and that's the role. And so I really have two bosses in the combatant commander out here in the theater, and then of course my Title 10 duties, the Chief of Staff of the Army, General Milley, as well. So that's probably more than anybody ever wanted to know about U.S. Army Pacific, but it gives you a good background.
Yes, sir. You got your hands full, certainly. Well, if I could ask you, sir, then how about your leadership approach in USRPAC? Is it different from your previous commands, your mindset?
It is, I would say, one of the lessons in leadership is you've got to be yourself. You've got to learn, when you're young, you're sort of reading about leaders and you get excited when you're sort of like a leader you might see out there or read about. But in reality, eventually you realize, you know what, nobody does you better than you. So when I look at my leadership approach, I try to be myself. I consider myself an authentic leader, and I'm all about empowering folks in mission command, which is, of course, developing that trust is key to that. And, we were working this as we were fighting in Iraq in early 2000. And prior to that, we were starting to see this trend, how the world had gotten so complex. The Army's, doctrine of command and control just didn't apply anymore. You couldn't, it just wasn't, it was too slow for the threat we're dealing with and the complex problems we had. So I really admire in 2008, we shifted to mission command, and that's clearly been my approach and style. Now, I will say, when you go at the strategic level, there is a difference, and the problems are tougher. And quite honestly, you don't realize it. You get less guidance the higher up you go. I guess I always thought you'd kind of get more, but you get less. And, you kind of balance keeping your bosses informed occasionally to get you back on azimuth. But you're really out there trying to figure out these, tougher, that term's popular today, wicked problems. And at the strategic level, they're pretty damn wicked, or they wouldn't be strategic problems. And
yes, sir.
Operational level, it's amazing. When I was a Corps commander, I thought the problems were so tough. They seem easy to me now at the strategic level. And certainly tactical problems, they can be very complex, very tough. But it's something you are used to, the tactical and operational level more. You work at your entire career. And the strategic, you get little bits of exposure. So, it is a little bit different style, and because of that strategic level.
Yes, sir. Well, would you say that those little bits of exposure prepare you for this job? I mean, when do you become the strategic leader that you are now?
Ooh, good question. I think one thing we know for certain is we've got to start earlier in creating and developing strategic level leadership. I don't think I started early enough. I was really, you're consumed with the tactical, you're consumed with that level is so tough. And you get, again, I got exposure as a young officer. I got to serve as an aide to the Vice Chief of Staff of the Army as a major. Well, that exposed me to strategic level, and I was just blown away with all that they dealt with. And I learned from watching senior leaders how they handled very complex problems. And I would find myself later sort of, when I was thrown in scenarios saying, what would General Griffith do? In this case, General Ron Griffith was Vice Chief of Staff in the Army. And so, I think, but what I've had arguments lately with, a joint staff and some others where we're trying to start developing in the Army. When I was at Combined Arms Center Leavenworth working leader development, and here in the Pacific working leader development, trying to start earlier, captains, mid-grade NCOs, and folks will say, oh, that's too early. And I believe that's old think today. The young leaders, we have privates thrown in complex problems on a daily basis. Now, they're not necessarily making strategic decisions, but their actions can have strategic impacts. That's for darn sure. And so, and then we're requiring more from leaders, younger and younger. So I believe we've got to start broadening and exposing folks to strategic level much earlier, operational level as well, much earlier, because that's how the world has changed and the problems are so much more complex.
Yes, sir, for sure. In my own broadening experience, I know that I was challenged to live above my my capability at many points, and I had to go through a rapid learning curve there, and it did. I think it was formative in the development.
Yeah, no, and sometimes you're going into those experiences, and you'll hear things like, "Oh, I mean, I heard this when I was younger. Oh, you're done now because you're going off to do that, teach at West Point, or you're going to get a master's, or you're going to this job, wherever." And we got to get out of that mindset. It is not all operational time. You've got to be broadened and understand. Yeah, you got to do the tactical. You got to do the key jobs in your branch and so forth, of course, and the key developmental jobs, of course. But you also have to broaden, and you got to get out, and it makes you better. I went to grad school fairly early at University of Virginia, get a master's in education, and I have used that in every job since. That was 1986. Every job I've had since, it has helped me, it taught me so much about broadening my aperture and so forth, and getting more operational strategic. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Well, speaking of teaching, sir, if you kind of roll back to your time as a young leader, and you think about your experiences, who had the most influence on you as a leader? What did you really learn from them? What was the defining lesson you took from that person?
Well, yeah, I've been so fortunate. There's a lot of luck involved. I joke, I never in a million years thought I'd be a general. I'm
Yes, sir.
pretty much convinced they got the wrong Brown, the value of having a common name. By the time the government sorts it out, I'll be retired. They'll pull my paycheck back, and I'll get private pay or something. But anyway, it's all good. But I've been very fortunate. I started with one of the greatest leaders in our country. I got to play basketball for Coach Mike Krzyzewski at West Point. He's the reason I went to West Point. And I didn't realize it then, what I was learning. But, oh, my goodness, there's an individual that knows how to and knows inspirational leadership and how to motivate people better than I have ever seen. He knows how to develop a team. And the thing that I took away as I was looking at, was Coach K incredibly smarter than other coaches or leaders? Was he incredibly gifted? But no, he had a passion, though, and he understood. He just always never satisfied and wanted to get better and better and better. And that's how he developed those incredible skills, people skills, motivational skills. So I learned that very early on. I was very, very fortunate. And I would tell you, I have had numerous amazing leaders who taught me a ton over the years. And rather than, I don't want to reel off 10, 15 names, but I did mention General Ron Griffith, who was an amazing leader in that here he was a Vice Chief of Staff of the Army, 4-star general, and he treated somebody he met on the street for the first time the exact same as he treated the president, a humble leader, an authentic leader, genuine. When I first met him, I thought, man, this guy's phenomenal. And I thought, geez, I almost don't want to get to know him better, because you know how sometimes you think somebody's great, you get to know them, and it kind of, oh boy, they weren't as great as I thought.
Mm-hmm.
It was the opposite with him. With the many leaders I've been fortunate enough to work for, that they just kept amazing me, and I was very fortunate. And and many of these folks, they judged me, they allowed me to do those things I love, innovative, and get out there and try new innovative methods, and not just the same old thing, whether it be in training, leader development. And across the board, so it's just very fortunate. Sir. Yeah.
What a great crucible of leadership there under him. I can imagine. Yeah. That's amazing. Have you continued the relationship over the years?
Yeah, that's what's amazed me. Your coach is always your coach, and I still, I'll see him. I'll get nervous. He's going to yell at me about my defense or something, But we become friends, and I'm fortunate enough. About 6 years ago, General Dempsey, when he was Chief of Staff, put me on the Center of Leadership and Ethics Board. That's just fantastic. Meets once a year, and I'm a military member, like not on the board, but a military advisor, and it's sports, business, and we talk leadership and ethics. And I briefed them on the Army ethic, mission command, but Coach K's on that. And I see him, and we stay in touch. He's such a busy guy, though. I don't like to bother him and stuff, but he could always pick up the phone and get a hold of me, and I'd help him out, and I could always do the same. And I was fortunate enough, he asked me to talk to the Olympic team when he was coaching it the first two times he coached the Olympic team, the very first meeting. And
oh, wow.
I asked him if we could bring in, they said they don't want to really hear from Colonel Brown. So I was able to bring in wounded warriors, guys, from Stryker Brigade, Scotty Smiley, DJ Skelton, Christian Steele, amazing guys. Scotty Smiley lost both his eyes to a suicide bomber. DJ Skelton was hit by an RPG, and Christian Steele was in a bombing. We'll talk suicide bomber incident. We'll talk about a little later. But anyway, they talked to these NBA players, and it changed my whole view of the NBA. Where they talked about selfless service, and again, Coach K's mastery of taking these guys who make billions, and millions, I guess, and teaching them how to be selfless and play for their country. And that's why he won 3 gold medals. So yeah, I feel very fortunate. I continue to learn from him, and he's still a mentor to this day. It's pretty amazing.
Yes, sir. That is fantastic. I just saw a quote from him, and it said leaders have to search for the heart on a team because the person who has it can bring out the best in everybody else. And that it rings so true for me. And I bet you feel the same way about leading in the Army. No,
there's no doubt. We have never had a problem doing enough training, and training is important, tough, demanding, realistic. But do we train the human dimension enough? Do we develop leaders that thrive in ambiguity and chaos? Not just comfortable, but thriving. And do we put as much into those skills? People are our advantage in the Army. Some other services, they're phenomenal. God bless them. They're great teammates, but they're system-centric. They're all about the platform. We're all about the people, and that is our advantage, empowered people, quality of which, like our non-commissioned officer corps, that no one else has, and no one else can empower that way. That's our advantage today in this complex world. But sometimes we handcuff them. We give them, too many 350-1 requirements and too much crap on their plate, and they can't, and we make them no different than somebody who's not empowered in another army, like say in China or whatever.
Yes, sir. Yeah. I was just having that conversation this morning, sir. I was sitting down with the company commander and his first sergeant and his team there. And we were talking about exactly that, the requirements and the distractions and the multiple priorities. And they were commenting about how priority is just supposed to be one thing, but it turns out to be multiple things. And I remember what General Perkins said to us at the pre-command course in Leavenworth. And he said, look, the Army, this is how the Army runs. It's going to be competing demands, and you're going to have too much to do at one time. He said, we're not looking for leaders who can fix that problem. We're looking for leaders who can navigate it positively and bring the team along to the end, to the finish line. And I thought that was a really good message.
Well, that does my heart good to hear. That's exactly what needs to happen. Battalion commander and company commander having that conversation. And what are you going to do in those priorities and what aren't you? And then it's backed up by your brigade commander. It's backed up by the division commander. That's what I ask for my 2 stars is back them up. You got to put it in writing. Here's the things they're going to do. Here's the things they're not going to do. So, if they don't do something and, the folks come down and say, oh, wait, you didn't do this. Well, you're backed up by the 2-star. We got to put our money where our mouth is and back it up and do it, because we have mission command when we're deployed. It's unbelievable. We all, you've got it. And people understand if we come back in a garrison in a home station environment, and unfortunately it tends to lean towards micromanagement, and we got to get away from that. We got to use mission command there as well. Never be the same as deployed, but it's got to be close. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Well, sir, a second ago, you mentioned the unfortunate Chow Hall bombing in 2004. So I'd just like to frame it up for the listeners here. So December 21st, 2004, you were the commander of 1st Brigade, 25th Infantry Division, which was the 2nd Stryker Brigade combat team to form and then deployed to Iraq. The Lancers are 125. They've been in Mosul for just a few months when an Ansar al-Sunna insurgent entered the Chow Hall at Fab Marez there and detonated a suicide vest near a large group of soldiers and workers and Iraqi soldiers. It was terrible. Killed 22 people, injured 72 others. And there are tons of lessons that we could unpack from this, sir. I mean, what an incredible event to have to lead a formation through. But I'd like to ask about that leadership during the crisis. How did this tragic event challenge you, and what approach did you take in leading the brigade through it?
Yeah, well, the first thing I'd like to, those heroes that remain in our thoughts and prayers. As not a day goes by, I don't think about it. I had 6 soldiers I lost in my brigade in that terrible event, and it was the toughest day of my life. Nothing could have ever prepared any of us for it. The toughest training. You just can't prepare for something like that. It was the greatest leadership challenge I'd had, working through that. We had in the northern Iraq, we had from the Syrian border, the Turkish border, the Iranian border, and we had 40 plus FOBs and cops. And so pretty devious, for over a year. Al-Qaeda got a Saudi Arabian medical student and infiltrated him into the Iraqi army. And little by little over the year, he brought the explosives in, had them under his uniform and vest as the Iraqis came in, the DFAC, as they did every day. And I was, on that day, I was walking with one of my battalion commanders right towards the suicide bomber, stopped to talk to a soldier, kept walking. It was about 30 feet away when it went off. And the immediate reaction is, you do go into that mode of training and immediately calling for mass CASEVAC, an incredible teamwork that occurred. I would say well over 100 plus lives were saved from the immediate reaction, and units. It was a variety of units. Again, there's units from all over on the FOB, and so folks teamwork to get them and evacuate them, triage, treat, and save as many lives as possible. But again, this enemy, they constantly planning and looking at every opportunity. And in this case, they had an insider at the combat support hospital. So they timed when the casualties arrived at the combat support hospital, mortaring the hospital as well, and mortaring those casualties waiting on the flight line to be evacuated. So some heroic things, incredibly heroic things happened that day. And the response was absolutely overwhelming from everyone involved. From CIA, State Department to 20 different units. So the thing that struck me is, not to, just one of the individuals killed was a company commander, probably one of the finest human beings I've ever known, Captain Bill Jacobson, and was like a son to me. Studied, I was on brigade staff for about a year before taking command. And I think I gave him every book I had in my library about command. And he was an amazing commander the day before, leading an incredible fight where over 80 Al-Qaeda were killed. And Bill was there leading it and happened to be the first one to get to him in the DFAC. And so you look at that and you had to go to that company now. They worship this commander. And, so these are things that, if you don't have the trust in a unit and the cohesiveness, it's certainly not going to come after that. And so you work through it. And, the commanders all got together that same day as that bombing. A major offensive was scheduled later in that day. And 11 battalion commanders getting together, and everyone unanimously said we're continuing that offensive and getting out there, and in fact did that. And then you look at, so that's the lowest and the toughest again thing I've ever gone through, and so you have to build on that incredible trust and those relationships, and you have to show, and when you really would like to just sort of go and reflect and do nothing but take care of the wounded and those families. You're doing that, but at the same time, you got to show that resilience of how you respond in a tough situation, so the unit bounces back very quickly. And we did bounce back, to the point we had some really tough challenges. No one thought we could have elections in Mosul. And about a month and a half after this, after a lot of work and efforts where we used the only deception plan, brigade level, across the entire area of operations, we were able to, because of that effort, we're able to have probably the highlight of successful elections, and actually allowing the Iraqis for the first time ever to vote and choose their leadership. And so, you go from the worst to a success because of tremendous leaders, caring leaders that took care of those who were hurt and hurting, and yet kept the focus of the unit where it needed to be to do what our nation asks us to do, and
Yes, sir.
in that situation.
Yes, sir. Yeah, I think about the severity of that attack and the impact that it had on the unit. And I think forward a little bit to perhaps a conflict on the Korean Peninsula, which is, by everybody's estimation, would be certainly a different fight than we've had in the last 15, 16 years in Iraq and Afghanistan. I think that units will take a different kind of that'll take a different kind of toll on our units, and I think they'll see more impact on their soldiers, in the form of casualties and hardship than they have before. And I'm thinking how leaders can prepare themselves mentally for that type of fight. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, there's no question the best thing you can do is tough, demanding, realistic training. And now we say that all the time. It's become like a cliche. Tough, demanding, realistic training. And what I find is we're often not doing realistic, demanding training. We're working with minimal amounts of information, where when you're deployed in a scenario in Korea or anywhere in the world, there's going to be overwhelming amounts of information. It's going to be extremely complex. And our training events are often not nearly complex enough. And then the other aspect is we leave out the key human dimension, as I mentioned earlier. And how do we work that leader development to really push those leaders, teach them, coach them, mentor them, so they can thrive in that ambiguity and chaos, and they can deal with, and when things get tough, it's going to be, people will, ready and resilient is critical, and that resiliency is not always an automatic thing. It takes an effort to develop the resiliency, and I find that part of it in our resiliency is the spiritual fitness just as much as physical. The mental, the spiritual fitness does not need to be in the spiritual fitness. I'm not talking necessarily religious. It may be your religious foundation. It may be a mindfulness. It may be a meditation. It may be, but anyway, it's a deliberate look at that aspect, because, as Marshall said, the soldier's mind is everything. And, if you don't have the right attitude with the soldiers, you're not going to be able to handle these complex scenarios and these tough situations that are out there. And again, the potential of, as you say, a much more lethal fight than any of us alive today have ever seen. And now we right now, of course, the diplomatic effort is the lead in that, and we hope that works, but hope can't be a method. As General Gordon Sullivan told us, and as a military, we have to be prepared. We have to be ready. So I sure as heck would be doing the toughest, most demanding, realistic training I could, combined with that holistic approach of making sure you're getting after those key aspects to keep people as our advantage. And working on those areas includes, like I mentioned earlier, mission command and empowerment. And what I find is units will assume that you can build trust. They don't really work on it that much, but you can't assume it. You must work on it all the time. Take advantage of every situation to build trust. There's no time where you couldn't, in a unit, where you shouldn't look at how are you building trust, how are you building that trusted team, how are you increasing the effectiveness of that team. What I find is we kind of go through the motions. Oh, that's something we do when we're in a big exercise. That's something we do when we're at a CTC. You got to be doing it every day, or you will not be able to handle the complexity and the challenges in this current environment we're in.
Yes, sir. Well, Covey, in The Speed of Trust, he defines trust as character plus competence. And I've always thought that was a pretty good analogy and a pretty good way to describe it here, too. And what I see that is, the competence is the tactical confidence and the tactical ability and lethality that comes from that realistic training. But then the character part of it is doing the right thing and sharing that hardship. I think that's a part of it too.
Which is exactly well said, Drew. When I'm talking the human dimension, character, ethical behavior, values, the character aspect and the ethical. The real reason we had to add an Army ethic into doctrine in the last couple of years is character and ethical behavior is so critical, and we will be challenged more today than ever before in history. In fact, no matter who the opponent is, they're going to try to get after character flaws, and they're going to exploit them if we show them. It's going to be everywhere. And today you have that capability. An individual does something wrong, and it's on CNN that night. And I often joke, I'm glad that my first company, when I was in command, the stuff wasn't, the world was totally different, and we didn't know what they did, because I wouldn't be here today if all that was on CNN that night. It was a different world, and you could make mistakes at a lower level and keep them confined to your unit and fix them. You can't anymore, and the character is more important than ever. And those key skills, again, as you mentioned, the competence is certainly a part of it, but I think the character is the tougher part. Doing the right thing when no one is watching, that discipline required. That is tough in very challenging times and situations.
Yes, sir. And if I could ask you your advice, perhaps, to, say, a company commander who is dealing with some challenges in his company, say, whether it's from, the stuff that's happened out there. There's DUI, there's positive urinalysis, there's all these things that challenge him or her in their time and in damaging their culture. What advice do you have to those leaders, sir?
I think the investment in people, well, first of all, the tough, demanding, realistic training helps, because soldiers want tough, demanding training. They'll complain about it. That's just how it is. But then they'll be, talking crap to all their buddies and everything. They did the toughest training. And then there's the other aspect. I found a very effective when you have first line supervisors working with soldiers on those human dimension aspects, the character, things like goal setting. Okay. A soldier with goals that understands them and understands how to break those down, where they want to get, and they're focused, a lot less likely to go out and do something stupid, a lot less likely to let one small incident cause them to fall off the cliff. They're going to be much more resilient. And someone that understands how to deal, how to build their resiliency, how to, you don't want to find out who you should talk to and what methods you use during the crisis. You want to be before the crisis. And so it's really key. And unfortunately, those are the things we often put in we'll get to that stuff when we have time, and we never get to it. And then you can see that a company commander, really any level, will start having problems in those areas because they're just not addressing them right. And the leaders, engaged leaders, it's tough, it's not easy, but engaged leaders will get after those challenges at that level and help develop those soldiers, so there'll be fewer and fewer of those problems. And you'll start to see, you can take your an average soldier, and you give them goals, and you'll see they'll be your best soldier before you know it, if you do it right.
Yes, sir.
It's pretty amazing.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
I remember the goals book that you had in 125 there.
Yeah.
And that, when did you decide you were going to do something like that, sir?
I actually learned that when I was teaching. There's, again, a broadening thing. So teaching at West Point, I got involved in this brand new thing back in 1989, 90. It was the Center for Enhanced Performance at West Point. And I actually wrote the manual, take the principles of sports psychology and apply them to leadership. And it was really fascinating. Having been an athlete, it was goal setting is a key thing. Focus and concentration skills, visualization. Almost every Army manual says to visualize the battlefield, visualize this, visualize that. Nobody tells you how to visualize. And there is a way to visualize. And the best leaders can visualize what they want and get their intent out so everybody else can understand it as well. You mentioned General Perkins earlier. He's one of the best I've ever seen at that. He can, visualize where you need to go, give an intent, just like when he seized Baghdad using commander's intent, probably one of the greatest examples ever of commander's intent and mission command, and before we even had it as our philosophy. And so that's absolutely critical. And those things, so I was fortunate enough to learn those as a young captain. And then I carried that to my S3 XO time, G3 training time, my time as battalion commander, brigade commander. It's one of the few things I made mandatory, really, at brigade and below. I encouraged it as a corps commander, but I didn't make it mandatory. I didn't want to be that draconian. But, I could tell units that were using those methods because they'd always perform the best, and you knew they were using they were highlighting those areas, taking the time to develop leaders and get after those key things to make people successful, not just taking it for granted or blowing it off. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And that's sometimes runs a little bit contrarian to the typical hard Army leader at the tactical level that we've come to expect and anticipate. How does a person at the tactical level who's just growing up and filling in their Army identity, but knows that they should and want to be positive and be an encouraging leader, how do you help them bridge that gap away from the stereotype that they think they need to live?
Yeah, it's interesting because the stereotype comes from television, movies, books where they don't, we're just portrayed the Army, leadership in the military. It's usually written by people that don't get it, don't understand. They think it's all, nobody thinks, just a bunch of robots, shut up and do as I say, and nothing could be further from the truth. The most innovative people in the world are those closest to the problem in combat, those young leaders, private specialists, E5s, because their lives depend on it. And they're innovative as can be, and they're amazing, and they'll amaze you with their innovation. So I would say the thing that's interesting is people think, as a platoon leader, I saw this when I was commanding the maneuver center and had, of course, the armor and infantry lieutenants there. And, they would think, I can't change my mind. I have to tell them what to do and be a tough leader. And God forbid I change my mind, I'll look like a wishy-washy leader. Now, if you don't change your mind today, maybe that was true 20 years ago because you only had so much info. You'd get one or two pieces of info and then you go charge, take the hill, whatever. Now today, you're getting overwhelming amounts of info. You're getting info all the way up. The plan changes 10 times from the op board when you LD, and you'd be an idiot to disregard that info. Of course, you're going to update it, and so things are different. And then they think they have to be the tough individual who stands up there and says, "Look, I know what to do." And none of you, I thought, the old. Sometimes you hear an NCO, where in the old days it'd say, I've been in the latrine longer than you've been in the Army. What the hell would you know? And I would tell you, it takes a more confident leader to stand up in front of a group, whether it's a squad, platoon, or I've done it in front of a corps, and say, I don't have all the answers. We need everybody on this team. The best idea may come from the newest person in the organization because they're not tainted with some of the way we do things. And they may have the best idea that saves the day. And I've seen it over and over and over again in combat. The best ideas coming from the lowest level. And I give you 1,000 examples, and I know you've seen it too. So, yeah, you got to be tough. But sometimes one of the greatest signs of toughness is you have the confidence to say, guys, I don't know what the hell to do. Let's work this out together. Let's figure it out. And so I think people do, as I mentioned a little bit in the beginning, people struggle for that identity when they're young leaders and they read books and they feel like maybe they need to be like Patton, maybe they need to be like this person, that person. You need to be yourself. Nobody does you better than you. And oftentimes it's not a popularity contest. People, maybe you'll be in great shape and, you get along, maybe not, but you got to be yourself. And then if you can be positive, and you should be positive and figure out how to be positive, you can help create that learning environment. And you must have a learning environment to succeed in mission command. If people think they take a chance and they'll be punished and their career's over if they make a mistake, you don't have a shot at mission command and succeeding in today's complex world. I can remember in combat as a Stryker Brigade commander, having company commanders out there empowered, doing amazing things, battalion commanders. One time a company commander made a mistake, and a 3-star commander called me directly as the colonel, brigade commander. Bob, how could that happen? How the hell could they do that? What was he thinking? You're going to punish him? And I said, sure. Remember those like 12 good things that happened over the last 10 days? All right. If you want to stop, none of those will happen again if you punish this guy because I'm not talking about anything illegal, immoral. I'm talking about trying to do the right thing and you make a mistake. And if you punish this guy for that, you'll kill innovation. And if you kill innovation, then we'll lose. And so, to that 3-star's credit, got it. Okay, I understand. But so you've got to empower people. And, we have a generation that's afraid of failing. All of us. I was afraid of failing when I was young, but I actually speak to a lot of young leaders today, and I say, if you don't ever fail, you're not doing a damn thing. Any successful person is going to fail. And again, I'm not talking about illegal, immoral, unethical. No, that's not acceptable. But trying to do the right thing and failing, that's part of success. I think it was Churchill that said success is failing over and over again and not losing your enthusiasm. And how do you continue to learn from your mistakes and how you react to failure? You're going to fail in anything in combat. If you're not failing, you're not doing a damn thing. And the same way in any other endeavor in life. So, but we do, and part of the reason I think this generation is younger folks, and I'll say, being an old guy now, I'll say anybody really about 35 and younger, when they fail now, when I failed when I was young, I could keep it isolated. Family, friends. It wasn't broadcast to everybody. What happens now? It's out on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. It's everywhere. And of course, human nature is to jump on that. I guess it makes people feel good about their failures that they see, oh, Brown failed and it's everywhere. And they're harping on it and it goes everywhere. And it's a damn shame. But, so I understand their hesitance. To fail. I mean, it's not fun to fail, but I think some of the things that have made me a much better leader is when from having failed and seen that, and then understanding people in my command, when they fail, go to them, don't avoid them, go to them, talk to them, help them get through it, and you learn from it. And then you come out a lot better on the other side if you do it right.
Yes, sir. Sir, that's powerful. I think that's a really good message for all of us down here trying to figure it out. And it was helpful for me to hear a leader draw a distinction between a mistake and misconduct. That put it in two different buckets for me, and I was able to classify failure a little bit better when I heard it that way.
Yeah, I used to talk to when I was commanding Benning at 12,000. Armor and infantry soldiers in basic training every day. I'd go out to their training and, when they're waiting at the range and stuff, I'd gather a couple hundred of them. And it was really funny because, I'd say, I'd ask them what questions you have. They'd always be like, what does it take to be a general? I said, well, obviously not good looks, but they would say, I'd say, what do you think? And they'd say, well, you never made a mistake. You did everything right your whole career. I tell you, I couldn't stop laughing when I'd hear that. And I'd tell them 2 or 3 mistakes. And then we didn't have time to go on to, I could talk to them for 3 hours about failure, but you learn from it and how you react to it is the important thing. And again, that's mission, command, empowerment, trust, prudent, risk. And you have that dialogue with the commanders and again, there's certain things you can't fail in, of course, if it's illegal, immoral, but other things, you have to succeed.
No, that's great, sir. Absolutely. Just to close out here, just want to ask you a little bit about your day as a leader. Your habits, routines. What do you go to for professional development to grow yourself every day? As the USRPAC commander.
Yeah, I think we always hear balance. I'm not sure it's balance because if it was balance, I'd spend as much time with my family as I do at work, and that's impossible in any field. Obviously. But I think there's expectations you set. And I think one thing that's key is I always felt I have 3 daughters, 4 grandkids now, and amazing young women, my daughters, and my wife's amazing. She's just getting her PhD in education right now. I've been an educator for 30 plus years. And I think one thing is, they knew that I had to work hard, of course, but if I could, I would be with them. I didn't, when I was deployed or when I was gone, they knew I wanted to be with them. So that's why, for example, I'm lousy at golf because I didn't golf on Saturdays for 8 hours with my buddies. My hobby was my family, kids events and family events and things we do together and your investment in that. So no, it wasn't equal time between work and the family, but it certainly was quality time. And they knew I would be with them if I could. And I think the other thing is you can't be afraid to tell. I see folks that are afraid to tell their boss or others they're working with that they're going to a family event, that they're supporting their family. It's like, it's like you're weak or something. We're made to feel guilty if we do that. And I think that's absolutely wrong. It wasn't easy, but I tell bosses, look, I'm going to my daughter's cross country meet. I'm not going to miss it. I'll get into work 3 hours early tomorrow to make up the time, but I'm not missing this family event. And I think that's important. And I used to have, when I was battalion commander, brigade commander, gave me crap for that all the time. He'd call me at 8 o'clock and say, where are you? I'm at work. And I'd say, I'm home with my family, and fortunately he ended up kind of being a little bit self-serving. He ended up retiring after brigade command. And and it ended up working out. But anyway, so I always had a philosophy, kind of get home at a reasonable time to be with your family. And if you have to do additional work, come in early, because family's not up at 4:35. I haven't had to do that much, but sometimes you have to. And then I think, there's the performance triad that we've seen recently down first line supervisor level, developed by the Surgeon General and MedCom. It's just terrific getting it to units, and they talk rest, activity, and nutrition. And boy, that's a great lesson. Be much more I wish we'd have had that when I was started in the Army. I wouldn't have brand new knees right now. I had to get new knees because all we did for the first 20 years I was in was push-ups, sit-ups, and running,
Yes,
like
sir.
crazy.
Right.
And there was no balance, activity, rest, nutritional concerns, proactive, physical trainer, stretching, all that stuff that's so important. But that balance, rest, activity, nutrition, it's out there, first line supervisors. I think that's really key. Now, for the professional development aspect of it, that's kind of balance and family. I think one thing that's really important is it's hard. I just talked about balance, but read. I remember Colin Powell, when I was a colonel at the War College. Colin Powell talked to us. He said he was in the War College, sitting where we were. I was at National War College. He was going to brigade command afterwards, and he thought, he felt pretty ready for brigade command, but he didn't feel real ready for things after that. And so he started reading, and in particular, he started reading biographies. He said, in a book you can read, the lessons of a lifetime of a famous leader. So really got me starting. I started to read biography a lot. And I remember reading about Bradley, for example, Omar Bradley. And it was one phase he was sent by Marshall to command Fort Benning in 1941, prior to World War II. And he was sent there to get airborne going and do certain things. And he had to, nobody between Marshall and Bradley thought airborne units, whatever, they weren't around yet, thought that was even a good idea. So Bradley figured out how to get the info to Marshall directly, skip the staff. And lo and behold, we had the 82nd Airborne, the wonderful airborne units because of it. And Bradley and Marshall created this, it was this whole thing, the spirit of Benning, something special about Benning. So I read that in the War College. Later, a few years later, I'd be commanding Benning. And lo and behold, things I wanted to do, I had to go directly to the chief of staff, things like the squad as the foundation of the decisive force, and lethality for the soldiers, and resilience and so forth. Had to go directly to the chief of staff, skipping the staff. Even things like going from heavy brigade combat team, why the hell we call it that, to naming it armored brigade combat team. The staff didn't want to deal with it, so you go directly to the chief of staff, which I had learned from reading about Bradley. And then seizing on the spirit of Benning from Marshall and Bradley, I implemented that when I was at Benning, the spirit of Benning, and we built in that incredible past to move forward as an armor and infantry maneuver community. So reading is key. Also good to read sports books, like Legacy is a great book about the New Zealand All Blacks rugby team. That's a tremendous one about building teams, and they use lots of examples from sports, business, and military. And then other sports books. And then there's some great civilian, because you mentioned some earlier, and I think Start With Why is a great one, and Good to Great's another tremendous one. And then the other thing is, don't faint when I say this, but read our doctrines, pretty amazing. And I will tell you, I was a doctrine rebel for most of my career. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't start reading all the doctrine until I had to command Fort Leavenworth, and I was in charge of doctrine. And then I'm really proud that, while I was at Leavenworth, we came up with the idea. We realized leader development is not happening across the Army. Why? Well, we're at such an op-tempo for 16 plus years of war in Iraq and Afghanistan that we'd forgotten how to develop leaders. So we actually came up with the first ever field manual and doctrine for leader development, FM 622 leader development. It is incredible. I'm bragging, but I'll tell you, General Lowe, before he left as chief of staff, held it up to all the division and corps commanders and said it's the best leadership development manual he's ever seen. And then there was an article in the paper talking about a civilian who had stumbled onto it and quoted it multiple times as with thousands of leadership books as the best they'd ever seen. And it covers some really key stuff in there on leader development fundamentals of development and how to create a program, historical examples going back to Marshall, Bradley, recent examples from brigades, battalion commanders, and then, specifics of how to get there and how to build trust, how to get after it, and it just goes into a whole bunch of stuff. So, and there's a whole bunch of other doctrine that's really terrific, like the new FM30, et cetera. And it's not popular, but there are ways. There's living doctrine out there. We can download it to your device, and you can watch videos and other things to get after it. And then I think that's just a key thing that you've got to do. It's tough to do. You never have time, but use those times like airplane flights, downtime when you're 2 hours early for the CIF issue and all that kind of stuff. There is time to make it. Yeah.
No, that's right, sir. Yeah, sometimes we get locked into the idea that we only study doctrine when we're at the institutional assignments or when we're going to a school. And it's important to bring it into the unit. Yes, sir. Well, sir, I cannot thank you enough for, first taking the time here to chat, but really for the investment in every leader that you come into contact with. I think it's refreshing when we get someone who really is passionate about developing leaders. And so we just appreciate everything you do.
Yeah, no, it's my honor. Again, I really applaud your efforts here, Drew. Just fantastic. And I think, boy, I would have loved to have gotten on the military leader site as I was coming up through the ranks and had, some people may say, well, you're going to show stuff. You're going to have podcasts or things on your site there that maybe they're not approved. They're not, proven. But I would say that's key, that you share ideas, and oftentimes the best ideas, you will know they're proven, and it's pretty obvious. And the only other thing I'd like to comment, I think you had a great point. I was looking at some of your stuff, difference between a boss and a mentor, and and you're like, everyone has a boss and a structure, everybody, and usually you have no choice who your boss is and stuff. And hopefully, the good news about the Army, the military, you move pretty frequently, so if you get a boss you don't necessarily get along with, you're not stuck forever. Like sometimes civilian jobs, you could be 10 years with a person you don't get along with, and it's pretty tough. I've seen that quite a bit on the outside. But the other thing is, I think a mentor, though, successful people have mentors, and you can't make it mandatory. We looked at that across the Army. It doesn't work when it's mandatory, but you have to have that individual go to for advice, for guidance, the mutual respect that is there. And you don't usually, it talks this in FM 622, leader development. You don't need to go and say, would you be my mentor? I've maybe once in 37 years, I've had somebody say that, but send you questions, start the dialogue, ask you, call you and talk. You naturally become the mentor. You have mentors. You're mentoring folks. I think what's interesting, it's not instant, the satisfaction from that, but it is the most satisfying thing are those you invest in, and then to see them be successful. I have folks who I've mentored, were company commanders for me, are general officers now. To see them successful is the greatest satisfaction and reward. It's not instantaneous, but it is unbelievable, and it's a legacy being carried on of that is unbelievable. So I just wanted to mention that. I thought I saw that in some of your stuff, and we didn't touch on that. Maybe we're taking too much time, but I think that is really, really important to get after.
Yes, sir. I am really, I'm just amazed at the way that our profession works, and that leaders, whether it's commanders or maybe working for an S3 who's influential or something, they invest in people, and then you see that lesson later down the road. My first battalion commander, he made it a point to teach us SDZs and direct fire control. And by God, if that's not my priority here for these young lieutenants, 15 years later, it's just amazing how it works.
Yeah, exactly, and it really is an investment in people. And for us, unlike, again, the other services do it. They have mentors, they do leader development, but nobody does it like us because we're about people. And we're not platform centric, we're people centric. And we realize that is the advantage, the ability, again, to have leaders that thrive and to empower them is the only way in this complex world to succeed. So I applaud your efforts as a military leader. Tremendous idea in these podcasts. And even if it's only you and me that listen to it, I'll consider it a success. What the hell?
Well, sir, absolutely, sir. I'm really excited to see there's a crop of junior leaders across the Army. You think Josh Powers, of course, that
Yeah.
know, Nate Finney out there, Doug Meyer here, Joe Byerly with From the Green Notebook. And there's a surge of a voice that wants to just contribute and share and go to the force. And I'm really excited to be a part of it, sir. It's really neat. Yeah, thank you so much, sir. It was a great talk. Thank you.
Thanks for what you're doing, and thanks for the opportunity. All right, one team, Army Strong.
Wow, tons of great lessons there from General Brown. I hope you enjoyed it. I always get fired up when I hear him talk about leadership. And a big thanks to General Brown for taking the time out of his busy day to do the interview. Really appreciate it, sir. Okay, for next week, we've got none other than the creator of Doctrine Man, Steve Leonard. That's right, the man behind the infamous cartoons and snark of Doctrine Man has agreed to come on and talk about the Doctrine Man story, how it started, and how he keeps it going today. He'll also share his lessons of life and leadership from his career as an Army strategist. I want to give you a sneak peek of that episode. It was a really fun chat. Check it out.
And the whole thing, it's funny because the whole thing with the secret identity was almost a joke. Because as I evolved the character, I thought, well, I want something obvious. Because people who knew me, at least the original probably 1,000 people, they all knew. There was no secret because they were on the email. So I wanted an identity that was Clark Kentish, that anybody who looked at me could figure it out, but I wouldn't have to tell them. And so when people did discover over time, it was they'd look at you and they'd say, "Oh, I knew it all along. I just didn't know it was right in front of me." And it's because my humor comes out, the way I talk comes out, the way I engage comes out. It's really everything is there, but it's like Clark Kent. He puts the glasses on, you don't know it's Superman. Takes the glasses off, you say, "Oh, it's Superman." And so it was the same. It was part of the gag to just make it so obvious that everybody would figure it out, and then no one figured it out. And then that became part of the fun. You have no idea how much fun it was to be able to sit in a room with General Odierno and have him make a comment about, "God, I hope Doctrine Man's nowhere around to hear this." And you say, "Oh, au contraire, our Doctrine Man's right here in the corner taking notes." And I did. I would sit and probably for the last 10 years of my career, I worked all at the 3- and 4-star level, and I sat in the back of meetings, and I would flip my green notebook to the back, and I would say, "Okay, here's an idea. We're gonna do a Chief of Staff of the Army cartoon, a Sec Army cartoon, a Sec Defense cartoon," and we would have little things, and I would write down little things I heard, and then that would be the genesis of a new cartoon. General officer speak lists, things like that, little things that you would only pick up in those meetings.
Look for that interview with Steve Leonard of Doctrine Man next week. I want to thank you again for checking out this episode of the Military Leader Podcast. If you liked it, be sure to share it with your network and start a conversation about leadership. And if you want to leave a comment or a rating on iTunes, head on over there and be sure to visit themilitaryleader.com and join the conversation about leadership. Music from this episode was composed by Ilya Rayovsky, who created a custom piece for the Military Leader. You can check out his work over on Fiverr. Thanks again, and until next time, lead well.